Hi, everybody. My name is Cindy Krum, and I'm the CEO of Mobile Moxie based in Denver, Colorado. We do mobile SEO and ASO consulting and also have an awesome set of mobile SEO and ASO tools that you'll see in this presentation today. So what we're doing is Fraggles, mobile first indexing, and the SERP of the future. This was a talk that was originally given at MozCon about 2 weeks ago, and now we're making it available online for everyone to see. So let's start by going back to the 80s, way before HD TV, way before smartphones, when the Fraggles, or Fraggle Rock, was on TV. Now, Fraggle Rock was a show that was created by Jim Henson, who also did famous shows like The Muppets and Sesame Street. But unlike Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock was all about singing and dancing and fun. And sometimes there was like a community-oriented kind of theme or discussion of friendship and how to be a good friend, but mostly it was about fun. So these are the main characters, the main Fraggles, if you will. This is Moki, Gobo, Red, Weebly, and Boober. And they're puppets, so they look like this. And sometimes they look like this because they're wild and crazy and having fun. And they live under this guy's house. This is Doc and his dog Sprocket. And Doc can't always see the Fraggles or hear them, but Sprocket always can. So of course this leads to hilarious interactions. And then these guys also live under the house near the Fraggles. And these are the Doozers. And the Doozers, they're smaller than Fraggles. They're about knee-high to a Fraggle, but they just love to build. They build and build, and the Fraggles sometimes mess up their stuff that they're building because their favorite building material, the Doozers build with radish sticks, but that just happens to be the Fraggles' favorite snack. So they come in, mess things up, but the Doozers don't actually mind. They just keep on building and building and doing their own thing. And I think this is actually a good allegory or analogy to what's happening between Google and SEOs right now, because Google just keeps building and doing its own thing. And yeah, the SEOs sometimes go in and maybe mess stuff up, play with stuff a little bit, but Google doesn't actually care that much. They're just doing their own thing, building their own thing, meeting their own terms and goals and stuff like that. So this is especially true, this dichotomy between Google and SEOs with mobile first indexing. And in fact, my friend Aleda published a somewhat unscientific but interesting Twitter study recently, where she got about 1,000 people to vote on how the launch of mobile first indexing had changed how they did SEO. And 52% of people responded that they now viewed desktop and mobile SEO equally, and 32% said that they were still more mobily focused, and 16% said that they focused on mobile only. But what's interesting here is the high proportion of people that are leaning towards desktop still, or at least desktop and mobile equally, which is different from what Google's doing, because they've said outright that they're looking at mobile first. So why, we might ask, aren't SEOs looking at mobile first, or is mobile as primary? There's also great evidence coming from Dr. Pete of Moz about the changes in the algorithm. So this is the Mozcast from 2014 to 2018, published and written out by Dr. Pete, where when he wrote this up, noted all of the major updates, but what you can see clearly here is the temperature change between 2014, 2015, and the beginning of 2016, and then everything after that. It seems like right about halfway through 2016, when Google announced their plan for mobile first indexing, Google has been making more and more changes to the way that SERPs look. And so this is important, right? This means that if you're still doing SEO the way you were in 2015 or 2016, that you might really be missing the boat. And then finally, of course, Rand's article on SparkToro showing the jump shot data that shows that 34.4% of desktop searches don't result in a click, but a whopping 61.5% of mobile searches don't result in a click. And since Google is mobile first, but we're doing SEO to get traffic, but we're only actually getting 38.5% of the traffic, that means we're only making decisions in our analytics out of 38.5% of the traffic. And that doesn't feel good as a data-driven marketer. So if Google is keeping all the traffic, if more than half of the traffic isn't actually clicking through, then what are we doing as SEOs? You know, what's the point? We have to look at this and potentially reevaluate how are we thinking about SEO and how are we thinking about our goals and our day-to-day job. So hopefully I'm going to help you with that today. So the first thing I want to show you is how I conceptualize mobile first indexing. And it's a little bit different than a lot of the other SEOs out there that talk about SEO and even mobile related topics. I think that mobile first indexing is more accurately described as entity first indexing, which means essentially a massive knowledge graph build out. So when we say the word entity, what we mean is a concept, or, well, really a person, place, thing, or idea, a noun, that exists before keywords. And this can be really hard for SEOs to conceptualize, but there are things that exist before keywords, and keywords describe those things, because the keywords can happen in various languages, but the thing doesn't change, and the thing's relationships to other things don't change. They remain permanent, or at least mostly permanent. So the example I usually give here is the concept of mother. Mother is related to father, is related to daughter, is related to son and grandfather, and so on, always in the same way, even though we may use different words to describe all of those things or all of those people in different languages. And that's really what an entity is. It's the concept that happens before the language or the keyword happens. And so what I've seen in my research related to mobile first indexing is it really is about Google understanding things and their relationships to other things in the context of the knowledge graph and building that out to make it better at answering questions and being an answer engine instead of just a website search engine. They're trying to surface answers much more than they're trying to surface websites. So let's look at some more data. This again is from Dr. Pete, and what it shows is growth in knowledge panel cards and results over time. And this is just a yes, no, was there a knowledge graph entry. And this is also from Dr. Pete, and he said to warn everyone that this is of course just one data set, but it's using the Moz top 10,000 queries. And that list of queries may focus a little bit more on head terms than tail terms. But in general, what we know from data like this and just from our own experience is the knowledge graph is getting more and more common as a kind of inclusion in a result. And we see this in things like, you know, this where we have just the list of Fraggle Rock characters, and you get carousels, but also within this you get a lot more options, because the knowledge graph has been building out not just in the kinds of queries that it can rank for, but also the kinds of information that can be included in the knowledge graph. So here you have watch show, characters, episodes, cast, and an overview, which is a lot more than the original knowledge graph for something like this might have included. They're becoming richer and more robust. And then if we go more specific and we say, I want to know about a specific character, let's look at Red Fraggle. When you look at Red Fraggle, you see the overview and information from fandom about the character. You see pictures, you see the option to click and find out who it's played by, and then what movies and TV shows this character appeared in. So again, that's more than would have originally been available. And then finally, we get this semantic understanding where you search for what's the last episode of Fraggle Rock, and Google understands that it's this particular one. And so it shows you all the information about this one specific episode, where you can watch it, play it, who were the main characters in the episode, so on and so forth. So it's not just understanding specific topics and lists like a dictionary. It's actually finding semantic understanding and surfacing answers, really. And, you know, in this case, Google often knows what is this episode, what is the previous episode, what is the next one. And of course, this one only shows a previous one because it's the last one. And so Google's using clues like that to help them answer these questions. So we also know that there's been a rise in featured snippets. You can see featured snippets are growing over time. We saw a significant spike earlier this year, and that's come back down just a little bit. But again, this is something we know from our day-to-day searches. And you can see in this example, we have the history of Fraggle Rock. We're getting more and more different kinds of featured snippets because this, for instance, is a double featured snippet where we get 2 question and answer sets together before we start getting the regular blue links. Then we can look at things like found on the web, this new kind of result. And when you expand the found on the web, which is kind of divided up by different, in this case, episodes, it's giving you a featured snippet carousel to explain and give you more information about this particular episode. And then in the last case, you can see who was read in Fraggle Rock. We get a featured snippet, but when you click through to it, it's going to a knowledge graph. So Google's linking from one kind of rich result to a knowledge graph. So again, they're keeping users in their space. So next, let's look at people also ask. And people also ask hasn't been a big deal up until about the middle of 2018 when it really started to increase. And then again, right at the end of 2018, there was another big increase. So we're seeing more and more queries that have people also ask results. And these often tend to occur just below a knowledge graph or featured snippet. So normal people also ask results look like this. They have expander arrows, and what they show is basically a featured snippet when you expand to answer this particular question. And they add more and more questions. And this seems like it's showing you related nodes from the knowledge graph or other facts or topics that Google knows about and feels confident enough to surface in a featured snippet. We also get this weird crossover where there's people also ask, which shows up below knowledge graph, but in many knowledge graphs on the far right side, there's people also search for, which seems like very much the same thing. When you click on it, you get a lot of similar information. So to me, this kind of says that people also ask and people also search for might just be different ways to view similar information in the knowledge graph or from the knowledge graph. And then last, we get stuff like this where when you have a really rich result and you scroll to the very bottom, you can get more than one people also searched for carousel. And when you expand these things, you're getting some featured snippets, but for instance, the ones with images like this one, the Fraggle Rock cast, shows you a knowledge graph carousel. So again, this feels like people also ask, featured snippets, and knowledge graph are all very related and coming from the same place because they're all cross-pollinating just a bit. The problem from an SEO perspective is that all of this stuff is super hard to track and attribute because if you're there and you're getting the visibility, then maybe that's good for you. But if people don't actually click through to your website, how are you going to make a sale from your website? How are you going to show to your bosses that the SEO that you've done is working? And if you get the potential for a brand awareness play and say, oh, well, we're there so people are more aware of us, and that's great, and you're at least blocking your competitors from getting that kind of brand awareness, but still, when the rubber meets the road, you don't really know or you can't really prove that this all monetizes and this is all worth the effort. So with that in mind, let's look at a first example story. So what I want to take you through is this hypothetical scenario where we are WikiHow. We have a lot of information about how to do things, which is great for knowledge graph and great for featured snippets. Actually, it's better for featured snippets. So let's say we're WikiHow and we have lots of good performance on featured snippets, but one of our sections of our site isn't performing as well on featured snippets, and it happens to be related to music, and particularly starting a band. So we can look in SEMrush and see that there are a couple places where we're close to getting a featured snippet, but we're just not there yet. The one with the biggest search volume is start a band. So then we can go and say, okay, let's see. We're not ranking, we don't have the featured snippet for start a band yet. Who does? And we can click over here and say, oh no, when we do a search on a phone for start a band, what's happening is you're getting the knowledge graph result for start a band, which is a song by Brad Paisley, a country music singer. And if you didn't listen to country music, how would you know that this is there? But since it's an exact match for the name of the song, this query is probably not going to get a featured snippet at the top because the knowledge graph is always going to supersede it. But if you didn't know that this was a song, then you might not think that that could be something that's keeping you from getting the featured snippet. So then you think, okay, well, we're WikiHow, we're international. Why don't we take a look? Because maybe this is just happening in the United States. So let's see, is this knowledge graph happening everywhere where one might search for start a band? Because we have international users, international content. So we can set up a test for multiple locations where we just test the top 50 world cities. And we say, we want to see what does the result look like for start a band in these top 50 cities. So we upload the spreadsheet of our locations, run the test, and here's what the results look like. We can click through and see that start a band, this first one I think is in China, and the start a band knowledge graph is there. We can scroll back up and say, all right, let's go somewhere else. Let's try Pakistan. So in fact, yes, it's there in Pakistan too. And in fact, I can tell you, I looked through all of these results, and even though the results lower down are being localized to meet the needs of the user, you can see that here we're getting localized to Karachi, and you can see the language selections. So everywhere we search, the knowledge graph is showing up, even when the stuff lower down is being modified. So let's go back and say, okay, maybe we just can't get this one. Let's try how to start a band. That's a bit more contextualized, a bit easier for us to rank for because we have so many how-to tutorials. So then we can do the search and say, yep, how to start a band does get a featured snippet, but it's just not us. So then we can start to work to mimic the look and feel of this featured snippet, but improve on it, all of the things that they normally tell you to do to get featured snippets. And we can verify and say, okay, let's do that same exact test to see, is this featured snippet showing up the same in every place as well? And we want to see, when we found out, yes, it was, then we want to say, okay, let's repeat that test weekly, once a week, so that we know when the featured snippet starts ranking everywhere. And it's this kind of a strategy that lets us get those featured snippets, but then also get the other featured snippets that are related to it. This one, like how to start a garage band, which is WikiHow, and how to start a band when you're in school, also by WikiHow. So we have a way of monitoring not only when does a featured snippet occur, but where does it occur and what does it look like? How much stuff is included? Is it our images, or is it something like a hybrid featured snippet where someone else's images are included? Stuff like that. So the takeaway here is just that mobile-first indexing helps Google surface answers worldwide, and that's why the entity concept is so important. Google's looking for the best answers, not necessarily always the best answers in one particular language. And what I think they figured out in their attempt to surface answers more than websites is that pages are kind of an inefficient way to organize answers. what happened with Google, years ago, is that they had to surface pages. It was the only way they could function as a search engine. And so they would instruct SEOs to break up pages by topic. And the end result of their feedback was basically that if you have content, or if you have a keyword that you want to rank for, then you need a page about that topic. And it should be possibly its own page, separate from other pages and other topics, even if they're tightly related. So for instance, a page about vegetables might have the best content for vegetables, best information you can find on the web. There's an entry for lettuce, and there's an entry for celery, and there's an entry for radishes. But the problem for Google was that each different entry might dilute the other entry's keyword density or keyword value to the page. And so for a long time, Google had a hard time ranking pages that covered multiple topics. So instead of writing one great page about vegetables, SEOs would write many pages about each topic, or one page about radishes, one page about lettuce, and one page about celery. And in order to do that, since it wasn't every company's core competency to write, clothing stores sell clothing, they may not be great at writing. So the level of content wasn't always as great as we as users would expect or hope, and same for Google. Google got junked up with all of this extra content, which really wasn't in everyone's core competency. And still, with all this content, Google had to muck through it and find the best. And the most efficient way was to say, this is the one page and it only covers this topic. And that way, they didn't have to link users to pages that they would hope that they could eventually find the content. They would just always have the content because it was the only content on that particular page. And factoid, this is a real character from Fraggle Rock. Her name is Margaret, and she is a oracle. She's an all-knowing trash heap, which I think is a great analogy for what Google was dealing with this kind of overabundance of mid-tier, mid-quality content on separate pages. So let's go back to this and the idea of mobile-first indexing. We have now, you kind of might be on board maybe with my idea that mobile-first indexing is really about entity-first indexing and building out the knowledge graph so that Google can find answers and relationships to questions more so than just surface pages. And so what I think that's gotten us to is a new level of indexing. For so long, Google could only index different pages. But now I think that Google is able to index separate pieces of a page separately. And I think this for a couple reasons, but this is what I've been calling Fraggles, or #Fraggles. And so Fraggle is, of course, a word borrowed from Jim Henson, but it comes from the combination of two words, fragment and handle. And so a fragment is just a bit of text, potentially an answer, something like what Google might show in a featured snippet. And a handle has a lot of different names in the web world. Handle can mean bookmark, named anchor, anchor link. It's one of the things that we used to use back in the way old days of the web to help people scroll. So we would allow them to click to scroll to a specific piece of a page. What's interesting here is that for a while, Google was indexing fragments, and they would show up with a hashtag in the URL. But then that became a duplicate content issue, and they realized they didn't want to index one page multiple times for each fragment. And so they stopped indexing pages after, or URLs that had a hash in it. They would index everything, but they would ignore everything after the hash. And what's interesting now is that we're seeing in Search Console now fragment URLs getting back into Google Search Console and having their own ranking and traffic information. It's not a whole lot, but I definitely have seen in our own testing that we can have one page, and that page with the fragment or with the hashtag in the URL with different data associated with it. So this also makes me believe that Google is indexing fragments again. Now, the other interesting thing here is that, yes, you know, the way we did it was we added the jump link to our code, but it seems that in some cases, Google is actually overlaying their own link to that piece of content, even though there isn't a handle or a jump link coded into the page. So let's take a look at some Fraggles in action. You can see we've done a normal search here, and we have a question with a couple different answers, right? Is Fraggle Rock okay for a 6-year-old? And you can see when you click through to the answer, it scrolls directly to that answer on the page. And you can hit the back button, go back to the result, scroll in the carousel sideways a little bit more, and click through again. And what you'll find is that, again, it's scrolling to that particular answer that the fragment previewed. So we can see this. Let's just check out another example. In this one, you can see, again, what do you think those doozer sticks are made of? Of course, we already know it's radish sticks. Some people say sugar glass, radish powder. But the important thing here is you landed in the middle of the page, right by where that answer shows up. Scroll through, I always thought they were made of sugar. Scroll through, I always thought they were made of sugar. So again, Google is linking and surfacing fragments with jump links, even if the jump links aren't in the code. And this seems like a fundamental shift in how Google works, and potentially why the word indexing or mobile first indexing, how it got its name, because this ability to surface answers separate or differently from pages does fit well in this mobile first cross-device kind of mind frame. So let's disambiguate for ourselves a little bit, because this can get confusing. And I know some people get really upset with me and say, Cindy, these have existed for a long time. We call them jump links. And yes, it's true. Jump links have existed. There have been different ways that Google has incorporated jump links into their results occasionally. Sometimes they look like this in the fandom result, where we've got the link to the 96 episodes or the link to HBO. And those are jump links that were coded into the page, and they link to different parts of the page because it was pre-coded. And then we have site links. Of course, site links can look like this, or they can, you know, just be the blue links. But the important thing about site links is they're linking to different pages entirely, not different pieces of a page. And then with Fraggles, they're linking to different pieces of the page. They're lifting an answer, and in some cases, the jump link isn't actually included in the code. Google is overlaying it where it didn't actually exist before. Now, we know that Google can do this because they're doing it already in things like AMP featured snippets, where you can see here, if you have an AMP page that is getting a featured snippet, when you click through on the featured snippet, the AMP result scrolls directly to where that text came from and highlights it for you. So it's not only overlaying the jumping behavior, it's overlaying the highlighting behavior. So Google can do a lot of stuff. And what's interesting, it's not shown in this example, but in some cases, the highlighting makes it very obvious to see when Google is omitting pieces of the text that aren't the answer, because they'll do something like highlight the first sentence in one paragraph and then skip a couple sentences and then highlight the last ones if they think the couple sentences in the middle are fluff. So this speaks to a much higher level of sophistication in language understanding and the understanding of Q&A that I think SEOs often don't give Google credit for. Like, they're actually pretty great at this, at least in many cases. The other thing is that Google's announced that Krum users are going to be able to create links to specific words or sentences on a page and share those with their friends. So I could highlight text on a page and on the fly create a link to it and text that link or Slack that link to someone else, and it would scroll to that link. So if Google is making this available for users, then it's definitely something that is available to their bots. And just to reiterate the point that fragments are just covering the search results, and it's especially prominent in these kinds of results at the bottom, but know that it's happening at the top with featured snippets and knowledge graph. It's happening in the middle with people also ask, and then it's happening at the bottom with people also search for, related searches, and stuff like that, where you're getting fragments of information or sometimes knowledge graph carousels that give super rich results, but also give us a window into the knowledge graph and what Google really understands as topics that are related to this topic. And when they can do stuff like that, it makes it easier to do stuff like this, where they're surfacing an answer directly in the search bar before this search has even been submitted, right? They're giving us quick answers to questions. Or it also makes it great for Google speaking a result, because remember, the worst possible voice response from Google would be them reading the entirety of an HTML page to us when we just ask a simple question, right? Because then it might get confused, it might read the navigation, it might read, you know, title tags and stuff that is just not the answer that we need. But with Fraggles, Google can lift and read the result, and potentially in robot voice, but at least it's a short robot voice, not robot voice reading the entirety of a long page. So that is the theory about Fraggles, and that's ultimately what I'd like to suggest. So this is speculative. Google isn't calling anything Fraggles. It's just my theory. But I want to bring you back to the idea of entities for a second, and this knowledge graph build out in entities. Now, think about it from Google's perspective. They're trying to do machine learning, and they're trying to be great in a lot of different languages. So potentially, they use this framework so that they can take language out of the equation and do machine learning at a more base level, so that they can understand relationships and use machine learning on languages where they're strong to fill in the blanks for languages where they're weak, and to show answers to questions even if they struggle in one language, but they can understand it enough to translate it to a language that they're better at, that they have answers in. So let's see that play out. This is just a regular US-based search for Fraggle Rock, and we get a lot of the normal stuff at the top, knowledge graph, a really rich, colorful result here. And then we can go and we can change the language in the search. So this means this effectively changes either the phone language or the search language. What you can see here is we get the exact same result with the same inclusions for the media providers. The difference at the top was the color, but then the only other difference is below, when you scroll down, because the query was still in English, we didn't actually change the query, we only changed the phone language. Because the query is still in English, most of the blue links are still going to be in English because they're based on language matching. But in this case, when we change the phone language to Hebrew, Google is saying, oh, for this Wikipedia entry, I see through hreflang that there's a Hebrew entry that matches this entry. So we're going to show them both. You can see the Hebrew Wikipedia version is on the top one, and then the English one is next. So what this tells us is, number one, Google is translating knowledge graph rather than resurfacing or researching for different knowledge graph. They're generally translating an existing knowledge graph to whatever your language setting is. But number two, they're using hreflang to add in results if they detect that you might want information in a different language, or in a different language than they have it available in their result set. So that is fascinating. And again, that seems like an important change that really shakes things up. So let's do another case study, or another hypothetical scenario. Let's pretend this time that we are Guitar Center. And specifically, let's say we're Guitar Center based in Washington, and the Washington stores and website just haven't been driving enough sales. So we can look and say, okay, well, we know that in this industry, it's heavily dominated by paid and PPC, but nothing weird has happened. This is normal change, you know, growth, nothing crazy going on in the analytics. But when we look at the search results, we have things that people should know. For instance, in this search result for best electric guitar, the thing that's showing up above PPC is a knowledge graph carousel for the best bass guitar players. So potentially, people are getting distracted before they even get to the PPC because they're saying, oh, I want to know about more about Jimi Hendrix, or I want to know more about these people, or I see all these filters that I can click on to say who is the best bass guitar player in the US, or who is the best bassist in the US. And you can turn those filters on and off, and that's an easy way to get distracted from the PPC result below it that you can see right there. So we can also do a search and see that for some queries, especially ones that are a guitar store near me that would generally result in a map pack, now they're getting these really rich PPC results where you have the option to see guitar stores and see guitars in the store or shop online, and you're already shown pictures of guitars that are for sale. And for someone who's shopping for a guitar, this can really draw you in because you start looking at the guitars and reading about them, or saying, oh no, I really want to go, I actually want to go online. I didn't realize there was, you know, a lot of stuff online, or that I could do that. So they click in and they get drawn in here before they ever get down to the map result below. So again, something that both the SEO teams and the paid teams should know about. And then last, you can see when we search for buy a guitar, we have those cluster PPC ads at the top. We have a map ad that has lots of 5-star results, lots of quotes and stuff like that. We have some Fraggles there. And then we have this, which looks like a product listing ad, a PLA, but it's not. It's actually considered organic, and it's slightly different. It doesn't have the paid symbol or iconography anywhere. And what this is a result from Google's Merchant Center, which is where you would set up your PLAs, your product listing ads for PPC. But now you can send information through the Merchant Center even if you're not necessarily doing PPC. And this is how Google gets really rich information about different kinds of products and their features and stuff like that. So this result, here's another one. This is what it looks like. And it's got a sideways scroll. But when you click through, what you're getting to is actually a product knowledge graph with disambiguation at the top, reviews down below, information about the manufacturer. And it does eventually show you where you can buy this particular product. And in this case, we were looking at the white Fender Stratocaster, but we can do the drop down where it says white, change the color, and then see how does that change, where else is it available, does it change the price, stuff like that. And of course, you can scroll down and see reviews that have been written and aggregated about this product. And so this part is paid. But having the product carousel and the product knowledge graph is only a result of being in the PLA system. And then when you click through, you're getting over to a website where you can make the purchase of the guitar rather than going through Google Shopping or something like that. So it's not connected to Google Shopping. It's getting you traffic to your website. So that's fascinating. And if we're Guitar Center, this is something we really need to know, really need to be on top of. So we can do a search and say, okay, how often is this affecting us? Let's say we'll set a pin right at the center of the store, and we'll see, is this something that's happening, you know, everywhere where people who might go to the store are? Is that PPC ad happening everywhere and distracting from the map? Where is this happening? And so we can set the pin and set a radius and say, we want to do this, grid radius is 5 miles, and do it every 2 miles. We'll do another radius of 5 miles. And so we can say, oh, wait, maybe that's not enough. Let's increase it and change the grid increment to 1, we get more pins, more information. And then we can run and look at all the results and make a spreadsheet like this, where we see, yeah, here are all of the addresses of all of those locations. And you can say, did they have PLAs? Did they have ads? Did it take more than one screen? Was the primary ranking a GMB, a map, or something else? Were there ads in the maps? And was that free product carousel from Merchant Center showing in the result? And what we found most consistently here is that it was showing up everywhere. Yes, 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 all the way down. So then we know, okay, if we're Guitar Center, we really need to be there, but then we also need to be a part of those in-store online PPC ads because people are getting sucked into those before they even get a chance to see the organic rankings. And if they're not getting sucked in there, they might be getting distracted by the map. So it would make sense that SEO in this scenario might not be driving the same traffic that it has been because so much is happening above position 1. So the reality, and I think we've kind of driven the point home, is that Google wants to index more than just websites. We saw that in the previous example with the product knowledge graph. They want to index things like products, and they want to surface content in their universe when they can, rather than always having to link off to a website. And so a lot of SEOs are getting upset about this, and they're saying, oh, well, Google's not driving as much traffic to my website as they used to, and Google's lifting content from my website. And I'm calling that windowing. So Google's doing a lot more windowing of content into the SERP. But I think, SEOs are saying that this might be bad, this is hurting us, it's hurting our clicks, but I think that's short-term thinking, because windowing content is actually great for brands. If it gives the person the information that they were looking for, then it creates a better user experience. But beyond that, I want you to think about the future and Google being able to index things that don't necessarily rely on specific web URLs or a web page. If Google can index Fraggles and fragments and add handles onto things where they didn't exist before, there's this risk that, and it seems very likely, that Google is going to start windowing other kinds of content other than just websites. So they could window native app content. They could window TV or movie content. They could window game content, all these different things. They could window podcasts that could show up in the SERP to create a better user experience, a more mobile-friendly user experience. So you may be kind of irritated that Google is lifting your content now, but when all those other things are getting lifted instead of you, you're going to want this back. That's the point, is this might be the best you can get. Or at least it's not a horrible thing to strive for, to make sure that other kinds of content isn't displacing you from the result. So the reality is that people are changing their behavior on mobile phones, and they're expecting things like entertainment on demand. We now use our mobile phone as the TV guide and the movie listings, and we get all of our information about entertainment from our phones. But the problem with that is historically Google has struggled to crawl and index stuff in a timely manner. Crawling and indexing takes time. And yes, they started to prioritize and do a better job of crawling and finding new content on sites where they knew that there was new stuff coming out every day. But it hasn't always been that way. Sometimes we had to wait for things to rank. Sometimes we had to wait for the crawler to find things, even after submitting sitemaps. And so this need for people to be able to search their phone and find the hottest news or the hottest topic that just became a big deal in the past day or two is new but pressing, and Google wants to be a part of it. So I'll show you where all of this stuff comes together. And this is actually a GIF that came out of CES 2016. So it's a voice search for Big Buck Bunny, and you're in your TV console, and Google's showing you related information. It's showing you knowledge graph entry or a featured snippet potentially about Big Buck Bunny, but also where you can see it. So this feels very much like the knowledge graph that we were looking at a minute ago for Fraggle Rock, where we've got, you can watch it here, here, here. It's on live TV now, or at this time. All of this information that's within the knowledge graph. We can see in this example, same thing, hidden figures. We search not for hidden figures, but tell me about Katherine Johnson, who is the main character and a real life person in Hidden Figures. And it's surfacing that information via voice search, but it sure looks like it's knowledge graph, or at least a featured snippet with a picture. And this is where Google wants to go. This is where they've been planning on going since 2016, since CES 2016 when these GIFs came out. And I believe that this is Google's new monetization play, because they have, quietly gotten much better at monetizing all of the different kinds of entertainment and media that they have available in Google Play Music, movies and TV, Google Play News, Google Play Books, but also a lot of the stuff that's in those places is being replicated to YouTube, so iOS users don't feel like they're getting out of their iOS environment. But all of these things are available now in a lot of different monetization models. So you can rent them, you can buy them, you can subscribe to these things, and then they're monetized within the thing with, pre-roll, post-roll, mid-roll ads. So Google's making money, from every angle when they're in the entertainment sphere. And so windowing media in a search, or windowing search in media, which is something that they talk about kind of broadly at Google I/O this year, they're calling it portals, makes the web easier to monetize, and Google's all over it. They're gonna make the money. So let's do one more hypothetical scenario. In this case, let's talk about How a Star is Born. And let's pretend, or not How a Star is Born, A Star is Born. Let's pretend we're HBO and we've just bought US rights to stream A Star is Born on our platform. So the first thing we might want to do is put up a page to announce this and show the trailer. Even before we're allowed to actually stream the whole thing, we want the thing for the trailer. We can test it on phones. Bam. What do we see on the right? That the video player isn't working on iOS because it's probably Flash, and that's a problem. So we can say, okay, if we really want to make a lot of money, if we really want people to engage, that's the experience that users are having. But then we can say, all right, we can create the page, we'll create the rich results with schema so that we're getting all the rich results for the page, and things are gonna look good. And then on the day of the launch, we'll create the media action so that people can actually stream this video instead of just getting to the landing page. So we do that and we think everything's fine and dandy, but then we happen to go in the search results and see that there's a problem. You can see with the blue, the dotted lines, we have our rich results and they're looking good, they're getting some clicks right up until the media action, the solid line, comes out. When the solid line comes out, everything in the clicks for the media actions goes to 0, or goes very, very low. And the problem here is this isn't the US. We're looking at HBO, but it should not have launched here because we didn't buy the rights. So we know that there's a problem. So we can say, let's check and see where are we getting 404s and where the 404 is coming from. So we can export in Google Sheets all of the queries that we want to look at. We want to look at this phone and that phone and this URL and that URL. And is this happening all throughout Germany, or what's going on? And the reason this is happening is because everything went down because they were going to a 404. So this kind of a test allows you to methodically be very detailed and see, our media action launched, but there was a problem because it was over-inclusive and included too many countries, and that sent people to a 404, which was a bad experience that we wouldn't have known about if we were just testing on our own phones, because the geodetection would see that, we're not in Germany, but being able to change the geodetection gets you more information about when things are broken because of specific legal rights, regulations, or redirects that you've set up for certain countries. And this is a big problem for a lot of bigger enterprise, international kinds of sites, and especially media sites, or any kind of site under lots of strict regulation. So the last kind of concept that I'll leave you with is that in the same way that checking your own phone can be inefficient, and give you a false positive, crawling is also an inefficient way for Google to index all of the stuff that they have, because they're building out all of the things that they want to rank, including things like the media actions and the rich results. And so if you think about the way Google works, it's just kind of a blind bot that's going through and looking for new stuff, and that's not fast enough for something like media, where people want it right away, or news, people want it right away. And so this is why Google launched an indexing API. And the SEO community didn't make a big deal about this, but I was, jumping for joy, because this seems like a big deal. Now, right now, the indexing API is just for job postings and live stream video. But we've seen this before, where Google will launch something with just a limited kind of content that it works for. Like, remember, AMP was just for articles, and then it got expanded, and then it got expanded. And I expect we're going to see that happen here too, because crawling blindly, as the web has gotten bigger and bigger and full of more and more junk, because people were trying to build separate pages to rank everything, just isn't the way that Google wants to do things anymore, because they need to be faster. They need to show things in a much more efficient way. So I think we'll see the expansion of this indexing API to fit a lot more things, because it makes Google faster, better at showing timely information, but also less reliant on links for discovery, right? You just kind of submit a feed to this API, and it's very much like using a sitemap, but you can do stuff in potentially more fast, granular, efficient ways, and potentially not just websites in the future. But then let's look at other things that Google is doing and see how this fits together. So for a couple of years, Google has been promoting progressive web apps, or PWAs. And PWAs seem like they fly in the face of what's in Google's best interest, because progressive web apps, even though they're cool, and Google does have an interest in doing things that are cool and good for users, and they're that, but PWAs tend to be very heavily reliant on JavaScript for the app-like functionality. And in some cases, PWAs are even built as a single-page app. Even some of the example PWAs that Google built for Google I/O to demo the functionality of a PWA were single-page apps. They only had 1 or 2 URLs that were associated with them. So that, of course, is hard for Google to index. But if you look at how a service worker works, what it does is it creates a database of content that's stored locally on the phone, so that instead of going to the internet, the PWA can go locally and get content, especially when it's offline. So if a page has been visited before, then rather than going to the internet, Google will just pull it from the cache, and that makes the behavior of the PWA feel like a native app and feel smooth and very fast, even for a user who doesn't have great or doesn't have any connectivity to the internet. Now, when I'm not a developer, but this is a quick story. When I was learning about PWAs and I saw how much Google was pushing people and developers towards PWAs, I had this, of course, natural conflict in my mind. They're so heavily oriented towards JavaScript, and they don't always have separate pages. How is Google going to index this? So I went to a developer conference, a JavaScript conference, where there were Googlers talking. And I went up to one of them after a speech, and I said, hey, I'm not a developer, but I have a question. Why would Google want to push these things that are so reliant on JavaScript? And this was before the launch of deferred JavaScript rendering. But I said, even now we can look back and say deferred JavaScript rendering takes about a week, or is on a delay. It's very slow, and process heavy. So again, even knowing that now we have deferred JavaScript rendering, why would Google take this on? Why would they want this? And I said to this developer, does Google just crawl the service worker? And very casually, he said to me, no, Google crawls the API to the service worker. Because at the time, you had to get a PWA indexed well, you had to register it in Firebase. And what it seems like is part of the process for registering your PWA and getting it approved in Firebase is Google creating an API to the service worker so they don't have to crawl through the JavaScript, which all makes a lot of sense, but also makes it seem like Google may be using service workers to help them architect their own understanding of a topic. Because if this is a subset of this is a subset of this in your service worker and other service workers in your industry, or with the same use case, then perhaps that's something that they can learn and program into their machine learning, into their knowledge graph, to make the search experience better. And so what I think is that Google will continue to push us towards PWAs because it gives them a backdoor to not having to crawl through the JavaScript at all, or being able to just use the API to the service worker to get most of the content and use deferred JavaScript rendering to verify the content and make sure there's not spam and stuff like that. So I know that's a lot. Let's summarize the main points here. Mobile first indexing might not be exactly what you think it is. I have different views. I think it's a little bit different. I think it's about entities and organizing information around the knowledge graph. I think that's why we've seen so many new things happening in the knowledge graph, and why we've seen a big increase in featured snippets, even featured snippets that aren't accurate or that are wrong. And it's because Google is trying very hard to organize and find answers within pages. And that's where we get to Fraggles, where Fraggles may be a new, smaller unit of indexing below just the page. So Google for years could only index pages. Now potentially they can index pieces of pages separately. And think back to that vegetable example. If you have the long vegetable page, you can index the radish piece to the radish part of the knowledge graph, the lettuce piece to the lettuce part of the knowledge graph, and so on. That makes them better at what they see their job to be, which is organizing the information of the world, not just organizing the websites of the world. So in terms of planning, I recommend that you keep an eye on the indexing, or keep an eye on the indexing API, keep an eye on what's happening in media, because Google seems to see this as a big boon to kind of slide in and address the needs of all the cable cutters who are using their phones and search to find the information and the entertainment that they want. So check out media, watch the indexing API, and just think more in terms of how can I get pieces of information into the search engine, because I think Google is also going to be updating Search Console to do a better job on reporting of when these kinds of rich results or inclusions are shown, so that we'll be able to monetize and measure better soon. With that, if you liked any of those phone examples or tools, those are Mobile Moxie tools. We just updated the tools and renamed them. So we now have the SERPerator, which is the one that lets you test mobile search results from anywhere in the world. We have the Pagescope, which lets you see a page from anywhere in the world. That's the German example where we can see how a page is rendering with German-specific geodata, or we have the app Rankalizer, which shows you app rankings in the App Store, which will be more important as more companies start putting their PWAs into Google Play, but also very important just if you're promoting apps. So here's a promo code where you can get 30 days free in the tool set. You get access to all the tools. It's a solo account. And I hope you enjoy it. And if you have feedback, ideas, we're always open to new ideas or things that we should add to the tools. We'd love to hear from you guys. So please leave a comment below. There's also in the comments below a link to an article that I wrote about Fraggles on the Mobile Moxie blog, and another one that I wrote as a companion piece for the MozCon talk on the Moz blog. So those links are below too. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks very much.